Regev is the spokesman for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He joins us now live from Jerusalem. Mark, did the Prime Minister listen to the speech? Did he have any reaction?
We're not putting out anything formal yet. I think it's often important to be prudent. But if you're talking about the chair of the Palestinians, as we just saw, the fundamental problem is that that chair has been empty. We've been calling all along for the Palestinians to return to negotiations without any preconditions. And they've stubbornly refused to return to negotiations. And I would ask them, how do they expect really to achieve Palestinian statehood and peace if they refuse to talk to Israel? It's impossible. And I think that's the tragedy. Going to the UN has been part of this Palestinian strategy of avoiding talks with Israel.
Mark, let's be honest here. We know what the real problem is there. The Palestinians say they have been engaged in negotiations, nothing but a stalling tactic. In the meantime, thousands more settlers have moved on to the West Bank. Israel wants settlements more than it wants peace. It's willing to talk, as one past prime minister said, but talk forever, but never come to any conclusion while facts are created on the ground. And you and I both know that is the sticking point. They won't talk while you continue to build settlements, and more settlement housing was announced just today, wasn't it?
I couldn't disagree more strongly. I don't think that's simply true. What is true is we haven't succeeded so far in the negotiations in getting a peace deal. But is it really fair, Jim, to blame Israel? You remember, I remember, in 2000, Prime Minister Barak putting unprecedented concessions on the table, only to have them rejected by Arafat. Just 3 years ago, Prime Minister Olmert putting on the table 67 borders with swaps, splitting Jerusalem, also the Palestinians rejecting that. In other words, if the Palestinians say that they've given up on negotiations, they're going to the UN because negotiations are not working, I would ask them to look in the mirror. Why have negotiations not worked? Have you been serious enough about negotiations?
Well, we are at an impasse on that front. What do you think will be the outcome of this move by the Palestinians? It was clearly expressed there by Mahmoud Abbas. Take it straight to the Security Council, where a U.S. veto awaits.
Frankly, I don't know, and I don't want to speculate. I do know one thing. The only way to real peace, to reconciliation, and to the formation of an independent Palestinian state is through negotiations. And what have we proposed? What has my Prime Minister proposed? He said it only yesterday in his meeting with the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. Mr. Netanyahu has called for the immediate resumption of peace talks where all the core issues to the conflict can be on the table.
Will Israel stop? Will it freeze settlement building?
Legitimacy.
Will Israel freeze settlement building
has gone
to achieve that?
This government, I think that's a red herring, and I'll tell you why. Because this government has gone further than any previous Israeli government in showing restraint on the issue of settlements. We did a 10-month settlement moratorium. No other Israeli government has done that. The whole idea that somehow Israel is gobbling up the West Bank with new settlements is simply a fallacy. It's just not true, Jim.
Not with new settlements, but with new housing, and particularly housing in East Jerusalem. Isn't that correct? I mean, one of the things that Mahmoud Abbas talked about there was the Judaization of Jerusalem, where Palestinians are being pushed out and more housing exclusively for Jews who move there is being built.
As far as I know, both sides are building in Jerusalem, and let me tell you the following. Unless the Palestinians can also admit and accept that Jews also have legitimate claims on Jerusalem, that the Jewish people have a historic connection to our capital, you're not going to get peace. And that's why we say to the Palestinians, we know that there are differences of opinions. We know there are gaps in the positions between the two parties. But how can we conclude negotiations? How can we get a deal unless we start? I mean, frankly, Jim, we've wasted 2 years now by not negotiating. Do the Palestinians want to waste another 2 years? Is that good for the Palestinian people?
Well, a couple of points that I thought were mentioned there by Mr. Abbas that some people in Israel may find some comfort in. First of all, the Prime Minister saying to the Palestinians very clearly, no violence. None of this should provoke any kind of a violent reaction. And he also said that this has nothing, this is not an attempt to, in one way or another, delegitimize Israel.
So I'll be frank with you, Jim, if you'll allow me. We are concerned about violence because the Palestinian Authority has called for mass demonstrations. and we know how these things can get out of hand. And I think the Israeli government will hold the Palestinian Authority to that commitment, that things will remain peaceful. We don't have a problem with peaceful demonstrations. Israel's a democracy. We have demonstrations here every day of the week. On the other issue, my Prime Minister, the government of Israel, accepts that there's a Palestinian people, accepts that they want self-determination, understands they want a state of their own, and will accept that. Why is it that up until today the Palestinian leadership refuses to acknowledge a Jewish peoplehood, a Jewish connection to this land, a Jewish connection to this city of Jerusalem, and the right of the Jewish people to a state of their own?
Mark Regev, the spokesman for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Mark, as always, I want to thank you for your analysis, your perspective in looking at this and sharing with us the view from the Prime Minister's office. Mark Regev, live from Jerusalem.
My pleasure.